I want to start off, Dr. Ramani, by again clarifying terms, because I think we're living at a time where there's so many terms on TikTok and YouTube and social media, and often they transpire into how we talk to our family members, friends.
Yes.
What is the difference between a narcissist and narcissistic personality disorder?
So let's start there, because this is already muddying the water so much, right? So narcissism is a personality style, right? There's lots of different personality styles out there. Certainly narcissism is a more maladaptive personality style because it puts people at odds with other people. It's not good for their relationships, but it is a personality style. In and of itself, it's not a disorder. There is something called narcissistic personality disorder, which is when a person is presenting with these various narcissistic patterns we've talked about: the low and variable empathy, the entitlement, the grandiosity, the arrogance, the envy, the admiration and validation seeking, that whole laundry list, the egocentricity, all the selfishness, all that stuff, right? So all of that is happening. It's chronic, it's pervasive, it shows up in their life in a whole bunch of different relationships. The difference is they actually go to a therapist's office who's licensed and trained to issue a diagnosis. And that therapist determines yep, I'm seeing these patterns. They're consistent. They're across situations. And they may assign them that diagnosis. The vast majority of people who have this personality style are never going to be in a practitioner's office who's going to make that determination. And it gets tricky, right? Because to call something a disorder raises a whole bunch of issues. Personally, Jay, if I ran the world, I think we'd get rid of this diagnosis. I think we get nothing out of it. I don't even think it helps the clients. A lot of clinicians don't issue it because it feels stigmatizing. There's a whole host of reasons I think it shouldn't be, but it is right now. Here's what you've got to remember. When we look at narcissism in the world, right? So there's people out there who are narcissistic. They might be mildly narcissistic and a little bit more emotionally immature and just sort of selfish and shallow, all the way up to severe, where it can be malignant and it can be coercive and manipulative and all of that. And there's all the stuff in between. This book is really focused on the in-between, right? So most people aren't dealing with someone coercive. And many are, and that's a much more severe issue that is probably beyond the scope of the book. But most people who are dealing with the mild narcissism, they're frustrated and annoyed, but they're not devastated and hurt like we see in that sort of middle level of narcissism, right? So the difference is literally that sort of mechanical point. They weren't seen by someone. And I don't know that listen, I'll be honest with you. If I met someone at a dinner party and they start telling me their life, I might even think in my head, I've got a hypothesis clinically what's happening. In no universe we occupy would I ever say to that person, even if I talk to them for 2 hours, I think you have generalized anxiety disorder. I think you have bipolar 2. I just wouldn't say it, right? It's not the setting. It's not the situation. I might strongly suggest, say, hey, you should talk to someone, right? So where it gets interesting is the mistake a lot of people make is, number one, they assume that if a person has narcissistic personality disorder, that their narcissism is more severe. Not necessarily. There are people out there with NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, whose narcissism actually is not as severe as people who were never diagnosed because they never went into that situation. So you see what I'm saying? So there's people out there who are malignant narcissistic people. They're never seen by anyone. We can speculate. We could spitball. We'd say, yeah, it's probably the case. But that person with NPD may simply seen a clinician. The other piece, though, here too, is that what it's doing is it's creating this very sort of strange space where people are saying, these are the patterns I'm seeing in a partner, parent, whomever. I think they might be narcissistic. And the internet, as it does, is very quick to shame that person. Who do you think you are? How could you think this about someone? And this person who's probably already been really hurt, really devastated by this relationship, is now being shamed for sharing, I think this might be what's happening. It's also creating this really painful space. So suffice it to say, I think in the public conversation about narcissism, we should only call it narcissism. Getting into the weeds on NPD is really getting on this sort of subtle clinical point, and it just it makes a lot of noise here, so we're not able to have the clear conversation that these personality styles are harming the people who are in these relationships. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.